Good morning, it's December 5th, and this is To My Liberal Friends. In 2020, Joe Biden ascended to the presidency and promised to be a unifier. He was a career politician and took to the podium that day in January and made the following statements, and I'm going to quote from his inaugural address. "This is America's day. This is democracy's day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America's been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We have learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed." Well, end quote. Then he followed that up later on with some more of his promises. Quote, "We will press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do this winter of peril and possibility, much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain." And then came the pledge for unity. Today it sounds a bit hollow. Quote, "To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and to secure the future of America, it requires more than words. It requires the most elusive things in a democracy, unity. Unity." In another January in Washington on New Year's Day 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, "If my name ever goes down into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it. My whole soul is in it." Today on this January, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, and uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. End quote. That was Joe Biden in 2020 at his inauguration. And in that speech, he promised to show respect. How many people think he showed respect for anything? He promised to be a unifier and over referred to people supporting his opponent as MAGA people in the most vile way. He called them garbage later on. But let's look at what 4 years of Joe Biden gave us. It's not a pretty picture. The Biden administration will end in a little over a month. It will end on January 20th, 2025, when Biden leaves office. But the United States, and more importantly the Democratic Party, will be dealing with the damage Biden leaves behind for years. There's a reason for the voters for 40 years were never interested in electing the openly ambitious Biden president of the United States. Remember, he's tried to run before, until the bizarre circumstance of 2020 election. They knew for decades that he was not be a good president, and he's proven them right. We all know the damage done to the country by simply looking at the inflation that soared during his presidency, by looking at the crime in our urban cities, by looking at the massive invasion of our country by illegal immigrants, 10 million or more during his 4 years, and then by looking at the chaos around the world devoid of a strong leader in the Oval Office. But the real damage that Biden has done is to the Democratic Party. Exit polls showed that in 2024 presidential election, 35% of voters identified as Republicans, while 34% identified as independents and only 31% identified as Democrats. In addition to a big jump in the number of self-identified independents, the news in that is in 2024, Democrats slipped to third place in party identification. The Democrats' fall between 20 and 24 was the party's worst performance in many years. But in terms of party identification, Democrats have been in decline since former President Barack Obama was first elected. In 2008, the Democratic Party identification was 39%, a high that equaled the party's performance in the Bill Clinton years. But in 2012, it ticked down to 38%. Then in 2016, it slipped to 36%. In 2020, it moved up a little bit to 37%, and then the plunge in this last year it to 31%. That 6-point drop was bigger even than the Republican Party's decline in the final disastrous years of the George W. Bush presidency. But what does all this mean? The simplest explanation is that Biden and his fellow Democrats made the party so unattractive that millions of self-identified Democrats decided to call themselves independents instead. And that doesn't mean they won't call themselves Democrats again in the future, but it does suggest they're deeply unhappy with the Democratic Party in its current state. Now, we know that when voters become disgusted with one party or another, some of them stop identifying themselves as members of the party. And that's what happened to Democrats over the 4 years of Joe Biden's ill-fated presidency. The burden of Biden's poor performance was so great that Kamala Harris, she couldn't overcome it, especially when she showed no intention to move away from Biden's record or plans to do so. Remember, on The View, she said she couldn't think of a thing she would do differently. And she couldn't answer any of the basic questions, so she's as much to blame, I guess, as Biden. But the short version is this: Joe Biden was a terrible president. His party paid the price. Now the leaders of the Democratic Party have to come up with a real, not a rhetorical way to move forward. And I'm not sure they can, since they're still engaging in blaming everyone but themselves. And that's good for the nation and its people, and it's good news for the Republican Party. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, especially on YouTube, hit the subscribe button.